New York and Chicago running out of room to house migrants who were bused to their cities. In January, protesters took to the streets following the death of Tyree Nichols.
I'm just trying to go home.
A 29-year-old black man was kicked and punched during a traffic stop in Memphis, dying 3 days later. 5 police officers were fired and charged with state and federal crimes. One has since pleaded guilty, the other not guilty. In the courts, the Supreme Court handed down a historic decision in June, gutting affirmative action, effectively ending race-conscious college admissions.
This is a really disappointing decision.
Perhaps no court case generated more attention in 2023 than the trial of Alec Murdaugh. The disgraced attorney from South Carolina, accused of killing his wife and son, took the stand in his own defense.
If you take this gun or any gun like it and blow your son's brains out.
No, I did not.
The jury deliberated only 3 hours before finding Murdaugh guilty. King Charles III was officially coronated in May. Prince Harry was there for the event. His wife Meghan Markle was notably not, in a year when the royal rift between the couple and palace spared no one. Harry's memoir,
We want privacy! We want privacy!
and the South Park parody.
Thanks for having us on the show!
For many, the year 2023 was the one we lost a friend.
Hi, it's Chandler.
Actor Matthew Perry died in October at the age of 54. The music world said goodbye to an icon, Tina Turner, and the mayor of Margaritaville, Jimmy Buffett. Tributes also poured in for trailblazing women in politics, Senator Dianne Feinstein, the first female Supreme Court Justice, Sandra Day O'Connor, and former First Lady, Rosalind Carter.
Don't know what you're waiting for.
It was a huge year for women in entertainment. Stadiums were ruled by Queen Bee, Beyonce, who also won a 32nd Grammy, and by Taylor Swift, who became a billionaire and Times Person of the Year. The artist even crossed over into football, showing up at Chiefs games to support her new beau, Travis Kelce. Speaking of sports, Simone Biles returned to gymnastics, vaulting to her 6th world title. A comeback on the mat, matched by one on the field. Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin suffered a cardiac arrest, and medics restarted his heart.
This event was life-changing, but it's not the end of my story.
Hamlin didn't just recover, he returned to the game he loves, a symbol of resilience and strength. That just might be the best way to define 2023.
What a year it's been. Thank you so much, Joe Fryer, for that. Ready to party? Organizers put the finishing touches on New Year's Eve in Times Square. We're going to talk.
To light a match.
Assault on Ukraine since the start of the war. The images coming in from Kyiv as Ukraine pleads for more military aid. We're beginning the hour with that new legal showdown over Donald Trump's eligibility to even be on the ballot. Maine Secretary of State issuing a decision last night that the former president can't be a candidate in their primary because he violated the Constitution's insurrection clause.
The weight of the evidence, all of the evidence, made clear that Mr. Trump was aware of the tinder laid by a multi-month effort to delegitimize a Democratic election, the election of 2020, and then chose to light a match on January 6th
Now, we should note on the same night that we got that news from Maine, the state of California made the opposite decision, saying Trump can remain on the ballot. And we are still awaiting a key decision from Oregon on its primary ballot. But as you can see right here from the map, these ballot battles are popping up all over the country. Joining us now, NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley, Glenn Kirshner, former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst, and former Congressman David Jolly from Florida. David's also an MSNBC political analyst. Welcome, guys, to all of you. So, Ryan, Trump's campaign has already vowed to challenge this decision in Maine. So where does it go next?
To the Supreme Court, ultimately, right? That's sort of where a lot of these challenges are going to end up in the next year. 2024 is going to be full of a lot of these cases working their way up to the Supreme Court, whether it be these challenges to Trump's access to the ballot or whether it be through the Jack Smith case, for example. So you can basically expect the Supreme Court to be playing a pretty major role in this 2024 race. So I think, there's a difference between obviously the Maine decision, where this was a decision that was made by an official who was appointed by elected officials, one person it all boils down to, whereas the Colorado case is more about justices on the Colorado Supreme Court making a decision in unison, and probably might be looked at a little bit more strongly, I think, by the Supreme Court, or maybe a little bit differently than the case out of Maine, and then California going in a completely opposite direction, deciding that Donald Trump should have access to the ballot here. So it'll be an interesting next few weeks and months as we go into 2024.
And again, all this highlights the difference in various states and their state election laws, Glenn. Look, things are moving fast. How fast might the U.S. Supreme Court step in and decide this issue? Is there any wiggle room for the High Court to not take this case?
There is wiggle room, but I agree with Ryan. Undoubtedly, the Supreme Court will want to be a player here. And I think we can start with the proposition that it's almost inconceivable, Alex, that the Supreme Court would rule that somebody who holds the office of the presidency can engage in insurrection against the United States and can nevertheless hold the office of the presidency again in the future. That would run contrary to the plain language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and certainly to the spirit of the 14th Amendment's disqualification clause. But I think what is of most interest, at least to sort of constitutional nerds like me, is how will the Supreme Court navigate the split between federal power and states' rights, because they can pronounce what the disqualification clause means, but what they can't do is run roughshod over or negate the election laws that have been passed by the 50 states. So I think there's a lot of really uncertain sort of constitutional and legal terrain ahead of us.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Glenn, because are you saying that the Supreme Court could rule one way and yet a state could decide, yeah, we're going to actually do it our way? Or does federal law trump, not to use the word Trump, but does federal law trump state law always?
Yeah, I think it may come down to the supremacy clause, which is exactly the last point you just made, Alex. If the Supreme Court interprets Section 3 of the 14th Amendment as to not apply to Donald Trump, even if he engaged in insurrection, not apply to the office of the presidency, then I think if the states tried to act in a way that was contrary to that Supreme Court ruling, then the supremacy clause might come into play, and the Supreme Court might have to try to bring all of the states in line.
Okay. I'm glad you're a nerd on all that stuff, because I'm glad you explained it for us. David, some of Trump's fellow Republican contenders are weighing in on the ballot news. Let's take a watch at this.
Well, the idea that one bureaucrat in an executive position can simply unilaterally disqualify someone from office, that turns on its head every notion of constitutional due process. It opens up Pandora's box.
I said I would remove myself off the ballot, Colorado or Maine, if those are states or any others that keep Donald Trump off the ballot, because that's the right thing to do.
It makes him a martyr. He's very good at playing poor me, poor me. He's always complaining. The poor billionaire from New York who's spending everybody else's money to pay his legal fees. Poor me. This should be decided by the voters of the United States. It should not be decided by courts.
So look, they're all defending Donald Trump with Ramaswamy. You heard him there saying he would take himself off the ballots where Trump is not listed, not like he has a lot to lose given his position right now in the race. But how do you see this shaping the primary?
with a lot of intensity and chaos. I do want to pick up, though, on this conversation about the Supreme Court exercising jurisdiction, because as a candidate, I have a little bit of insight on how the Supreme Court might grab this. And it is true that the federal government and Congress defers to the states for administration of elections. But in areas where it is a federal office, there then is an additional certification by the federal entity. For instance, if you're elected to Congress, Congress has to certify that they're accepting the state's administration. So I think in that realm, because I agree with Glenn, the Supreme Court is going to have to make a ruling, and I think they ultimately rule that for a federal candidate, that they will have jurisdiction, and in this case, I don't think they're going to allow Trump to be disqualified. What does that mean politically? I think it ramps up the intensity of the election. Alex, chaos is coming. We know that. If we haven't felt it yet, this is part of it. And so Republicans will get more and more intense around this issue of Trump trying to be disqualified. And even others in the race are going to side with him on this. Democrats are going to ramp up the intensity, saying he shouldn't be on the ballot. We saw the insurrection before our own eyes. The question, though, does it persuade any voters towards Donald Trump or Joe Biden? We haven't seen that yet.
We are feeling the pressure, that is for sure, my friend. So, Ryan, Donald Trump wanted the Maine Secretary of State to recuse herself before the decision came down. Why is that?
I mean, she was elected as a Democrat, right? And then she was appointed as a Democrat, or she was appointed by other Democrats as well. So, I mean, she is in a different scenario because every state sort of has these own rules, and that's sort of the complicating things. You know, you end up having to learn how each of these various systems and states work. And in this case, this wasn't a decision that was made by a court. This is in the role that Maine law lays out, that she has a lot of power to wield here and can basically decide. And listen, I think what some people would say is that this is essentially the same as deciding that someone who wasn't born in this country wouldn't be allowed. But obviously, there's a much different set of facts that have to be a little bit litigated. And the other side would say that this hasn't actually, you know, Donald Trump hasn't been charged with insurrection or hasn't been convicted of anything of that sort yet, right? These cases are still sort of laying out there. So they say that these cases aren't settled. But, you know, just getting into the weeds on this, I think, is going to be more complicated for Republicans, both who are running against Donald Trump and Republicans on Capitol Hill, because it's going to have a lot more discussions about what happened in 2020 and what happened on January 6th, and getting into the weeds on that. And honestly, you know, they know that a lot of their base still believes these conspiracy theories. Most of them obviously don't actually believe these things, but they have to play to this base that does believe these things because they've been convinced by internet conspiracy theories that, you know, Joe Biden is a usurper and is in the White House. And that's what a lot of the base believes. So it makes things really complicated for them to have this continued narrative and discussion about what exactly Donald Trump did in 2020 and in the lead up to the Capitol attack on January 6th.
Yeah, you're right about all that. On top of all this, Glenn, an appeals court just rejected Donald Trump's request to pause the proceedings in the E. Jean Carroll case. So what should we be watching out for there?
We should be watching for a big fat money judgment being entered by the jury against Donald Trump, because this is the E. Jean Carroll defamation case, the sequel. When after a jury found that Donald Trump not only sexually battered but defamed E. Jean Carroll, he went out and he did it all over again. Of course, Rudy Giuliani, taking a page from Donald Trump's playbook, did the same thing and defamed the Georgia state election workers on the courthouse steps. This seems to be a play that they are running over and over again, but it's not a winning play. Their luck will run out. You know, the walls are closing in, certainly with respect to this case on Donald Trump. And whereas I think the jury awarded an aggregate $5 million the first time around, I would look for perhaps double that this time.
Wow. Okay. Guys, thank you so much. Ryan Riley, Glenn Kirshner, and David Jolly. I hope I'm seeing you Sunday. I'll make it up to you. I'll start with you, I promise. Thanks, guys. Happy New Year. Safety and security. We're going to look at how law enforcement is preparing for big crowds at this ball drop this weekend. And that is next when we're back in 60 seconds.
Go.
In legal battles, watch.
Here's a goal. Right there.
U.S. Justice Department is threatening to sue the state of Texas if it enforces a new law letting police arrest migrants who enter the U.S. illegally. The legal threat comes after Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Mexico's president on Wednesday to discuss ways to slow a record number of boarding crossings. So joining me right now from Dallas is NBC's Morgan Chesky. Morgan, welcome. Where does this immigration showdown go next?
Likely to the courts, Alex, and it will not be the first nor the last challenge pitting Texas against the federal government. We have yet to hear an official response from Texas Governor Greg Abbott, but this law would go into effect in March of 2024. However, you mentioned that the DOJ has given the deadline of January 3rd, essentially asking Texas to retract this or say it will not plan to enact it going forward. This does give a police officer, a state trooper, a sheriff's deputy the ability to arrest a migrant for illegally crossing, making it a state crime to do so, where it's always been a federal crime. And that is the main pushback here from the DOJ. It would join other challenges, Alex, that include that 1,000-foot-long border buoy in the Rio Grande that a judge ruled had to be taken away and not sit there as a barrier. Also, we have the ongoing battle with the state-installed barbed wire along the banks of the river. We know that right now, pending the appeal, Border Patrol agents have been asked by a judge to not cut through that until there is some sort of official resolution. So this is kind of the ongoing back and forth right now. What will happen remains to be seen. We do know that I had a chance to speak to a sheriff on the border, Alex, and I asked him explicitly, are you instructing your deputies to, do this when and if it goes into effect? And he admitted that they're busy enough as it is. They simply don't have the manpower nor the resources to add one more thing to their plate right now when it comes to potentially arresting migrants when they're trying to just protect their communities and take care of the tasks they already do have. Alex?
You answered the question I wanted to ask you. Do they even have the capacity to do this, which apparently...
I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to weigh in on this right here, particular to the illegal immigrants. What the American people are not paying attention to is the fact that you can be too good for your own good. And the American judicial justice system has failed to protect the American people. And this is just a clear example of that, pertaining to now those people know that we have basically strained all our resources and we're going to have to either conform some of our laws or we're just going to have to sit back and take it. It's kind of like the state government right now in limbo, making a decision towards taking Donald J. Trump off the actual ballot box. They want to look at Donald Trump towards Donald Trump being the villain. But in actuality, what caused not just Donald Trump, but half the nation to rise up against the system that is basically on its way out? It may not be completely shut down as far as it being broke, to the extent that it's no longer being effective. But technically speaking, this government is basically at a state of bankruptcy right now. Yeah, people are still getting checks. Yeah, different organizations are still running. But if you look at it from a technical perspective, what motivated somebody like Donald Trump and half the nation to go up there and show their rear ends the way that they did? Bingo. Various politicians that has allowed this to get in the shape that it's in. Just like various politicians that allowed for that scenario down in Texas to just basically get totally out of hand to the extent of where it is right now. If the American people cannot see that our politicians has failed us and that certain people are coming over here and taking advantage of us, taking advantage of our system, taking advantage of our laws, then they're basically blind in one eye and can't see out of the other. Because that's exactly what's going on. And I'm pretty sure somebody up there in the Russian government, pertaining to President Putin, probably sat down with a pencil and paper and said, you know what? The American people pertaining to this Potsy war are not going to be able to keep this up forever, pertaining to supplying money, guns, ammunition, bombs, and etc. to the Ukrainians. In other words, they're in it for the long haul, the long game. Not the short game, the long game. And it's really astronomical in watching what's happening all over the planet in various things that are starting to now materialize in a negative form. Just like what's going on over there in the Holy Land right now. You know, whenever you pound and pound and pound and pound and pound, for surely to God, Hamas has already got the message that he and his people are doomed. Now, if Hamas and those leaders over there, those terrorist groups over there, decide that they're not going to surrender, then it will be up to the Pakistani people to turn on those people and basically create their own coup towards basically either killing them or driving them out. One or the other. It comes a time where people has to use a little bit of common sense pertaining to standing up for the ways of righteousness versus the ways of unrighteousness. And that's exactly what America's having to face off on right now pertaining to all these illegals over there. That if the truth be known, states like Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, probably even parts of Louisiana and California have been profiteering off of substandard labor forces coming into America and basically getting it done for about a third or half of what they should have been paying for it to begin with. It's all based around the wealthy and the rich towards them wanting to even get richer. It's really sad that we don't analyze things properly and we only look at it one-sidedly, kind of like the Donald Trump election. Yes, I do believe that Donald Trump violated the Constitution whenever he and people like Rudy Giuliani, however you pronounce his last name, and all those other people that are now being caught on the carpet. I do believe that he created an insurrection. If the people would have been smarter, if there was the right type of people in that charade that went on, it's very possible that it could have turned into a bloodbath, and it's very possible that America would have wound up being in the state of martial law, basically in reinverting basically another type of civil war that may even actually be worse this time than it was the first time. And that's almost hard to imagine that it would be worse, but keep in mind the American Civil War, whenever it took place, people didn't have automobiles, they didn't have telephones, they didn't have resources like they do today. They didn't have, some of these homes probably got 20, 25 guns. They didn't have 3 or 4 automobiles. They didn't have automatic rifles. They only had basically a powder gun. They didn't even have a semi-automatic rifle back then. Basically, the whole concept of the playing field has now changed to the degree that if there was an actual uprising here in America that led into martial law, it would, I'm going to go as far as predicted to say that it would be twice as bad as what it was during the actual Civil War. Because now today people has more availability and the technology has grown in comparison to what went on during the Civil War. I do want to clarify something that I spoke about my son of earlier pertaining to the technology did not exist pertaining to making glass during the event of Jesus Christ's birth and his resurrection. death, and resurrection, there was certain continents, like over in China and Japan, that was starting to move into that technology towards creating glass and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But as far as what was going on in the actual Middle East at that time, I don't think that glass was available to be able to make some sort of a sealed container to be able to put the crown of thorns, the actual crown of thorns that was on Jesus Christ's head, and keep it preserved even to this day. You will never convince me of that. That what the Pope and the Catholic Church is doing is basically a abomination in the sight of righteousness, because they're basically telling an all out and out lie. Now, I think some of you who have probably read some of the material about the conversation that happened between my son and I, either right before Christmas or on the Christmas day of the year 2023, will sit and realize that there's a great deal of adversity still coming from people like my son in wanting to declare me as me being a liar, or me being psychologically, emotionally, chemically imbalanced, towards me being basically a lunatic. Well, if you'll look at the patterns of what happened in the proceedings of every other prophet that has stood up with a message, a divine message of God, they was basically treated exactly the same. Some of them may not have had to have hanged on a tree like Jesus Christ did, but basically it was the public, the demonic spirits that was working through the public, that was causing them to basically run them people from village to village, to town to town, to areas that they ordinarily wouldn't have never had to have went off into. I am truly sorry that my son feels the way that he feels about his dad. There's really no unescaping the fact that he is my son, and there's really no escaping of the counterclashes that's going to occur beyond the perimeters of myself. I wish that it didn't happen to him. I wish it didn't happen to my dad. I wish it didn't happen to my brothers. I wish it didn't happen to my mother. As far as, I'm going to look at it from a military standpoint, as far as it being collateral damage. But that, once more, is a characteristic that has happened in every man or woman of God that has stood up with a divine message, that it not only affected them, but it affected their friends and their family. So yes, there was a sense of the glass age after the bronze age. I may have them backwards, I don't know, but there was a sense that there was certain continents on certain areas that did in fact have the ability of creating glass, kind of like pottery. We know that pottery actually is probably one of the oldest existences, other than fire, that mankind had basically come in contact with and modified, and used it for their own survival, for their own good. There's one other thing that I want to touch base on, and I hope that I get it on this particular digital video here that I'm putting out on the ending part of year 2023, pertaining to the woman that's running for president that said something about the Civil War, and then Biden come back and said, yes, the Civil War was about slavery and slavery alone. The Civil War, this is my opinion, and I got a right to my opinion. The Civil War was a very, very complex thing to study. And you have to look at a little bit before what was going on and what made that come to a boiling point. There was still territorial issues out west. The states was just becoming basically legalized states in the fact that each state wanted to have its own statehood. it wasn't until the federal government stepped in and told all of them, because it had already been passed in 2 different states pertaining to slavery up north, but it was Lincoln, the federal government, that had to step in and say, you know what, we're going to abolish this. Not only we're going to abolish it, but we're going to give the black man the same right in voting in and out his politicians that he desires, because in having a true democracy, it should be fair, not just for one group, but for all. But the Civil War was not just about slavery. It was about state rights. It was about a complex situation towards a government that was becoming established, that was going through its growing pains. And if people like Biden cannot look at that in a logical form at his age, looking at it from basically a community perspective, standing back and looking at it from different angles, if he cannot acknowledge that, then obviously he is not qualified himself to be able to run for president again, because either he's incapable or he's so old that now his reasoning is off. His reasoning is off. There's no doubt Donald J. Trump had the proper reasoning pertaining to his interior motives, because he's seen how distressed that this great nation was becoming, of us already being, I think at that time was probably about $28 trillion whenever he first started running for office. And of course we know that whenever COVID hit, that basically tag on a quick $5 or $6 trillion on top of COVID that slowed everything down. And I understand his moral memento in wanting to go forth in trying to save this great nation. I do. I understand that. But what he didn't put under consideration is that not everybody was going to actually do it towards the Insurrection Act. Also, the Insurrection Act, well, I'll get on that in just a minute whenever we cover something else here. Let's go on.
They don't, which then begs the question, why is Greg Abbott doing this, if not for political posturing? All things that we will have to see get answered in the new year. Morgan Chesky, thank you for that. Turning now to a new public health alert involving Ozempic. Health officials are warning about fake versions of the weight loss drug flooding the market, just as millions are ringing in the new year, motivated to drop a few pounds. NBC News correspondent Stephanie Goss brings us the latest.
Demand for diabetes and weight loss medications like Ozempic and Wegovy exploded this year, many posting progress on social media.
I am down 60 whole pounds.
2024 is set to be no different, as more and more people embrace the dramatically successful medications to shed pounds, including most recently Oprah. But as demand grows, so do concerns about counterfeits. Partnership for Safe Medicines confirms to NBC News that fake versions of this class of drugs have been discovered in over a dozen countries, including the U.S. Last week, the FDA, together with the makers of Ozempic, Novo Nordisk, announced that counterfeit versions of the diabetes drug made it into the U.S. market, releasing the batch codes to the public. According to the company, the needles inside the boxes were also counterfeit and posed a potential risk of infection. So far, there have been no serious side effects from the fakes. The FDA warns the counterfeits could still be in the supply chain.
How are people supposed to be able to tell the difference?
Yeah, it's very hard to tell the difference if you're accessing the product from a place that is not legitimate, like an online pharmacy, or not through your healthcare professional. That's probably the highest risk for being exposed to a counterfeit drug.
Experts say counterfeiters are stepping in to fill a void. According to the FDA, semaglutide, the active ingredient used in Ozempic and Wegovy, has been in short supply since March of 2022.
We have a global supply chain. We have medicines coming from everywhere. And a lot of times when these products are in high demand, there are counterfeiters who want to make money off.
Our thanks to Stephanie Gonsk for that report. Top 5 next. Joyce Vance joins us with a look at the major legal cases facing the former president and other key figures.
We're going to move on. We already know about all this stuff. He's got his hands full.
B would test, quote, new orbital regimes. It's also going to investigate the effects of radiation on NASA-provided vegetable seeds. That's research that's necessary to colonize the moon or Mars one day. The launch itself was delayed about 2 weeks. It was also about 2 weeks ago that China launched its own secretive robot space plane, the Shenlong, to orbit. Earlier this month, the head of the Space Force, General Chance Saltzman, disclosing that he expected China to launch the Shenlong around the same time as the X-37B in a competitive move, saying, quote, these are 2 of the most watched objects on orbit while they're on orbit. It's probably no coincidence that they're trying to match us in timing and sequence of this. Alex, we talk about geopolitical tensions between the U.S. and China here on Earth. The rivalry is also playing out in space. This is just the latest example, but it also, of course, adds to the intrigue around this mysterious, classified U.S. military program, the X-37B.
Listen, my friend, you delivered considering how hush-hush it is. Well done. I'm applauding you. I learned a lot more than I anticipated. I thought it was going to be a bunch of questions I'd have to ask you that you maybe couldn't answer. Okay, Morgan Brennan, thank you so much. Happy New Year. Well, still ahead, saying goodbye and look back at the unforgettable people we lost in 2023. You're watching MSNBC.
Let's move on. We done covered over the most part of that.
No matter who you are, shining bright to see what you can truly be, what you can truly be.
My name is John Shaft. Freeze.
Shining star, no matter who you are, shining bright to see what you can truly be.
That was fun.
You want to marry me?
Climbed aboard the dream weaver train. Dream weaver, I believe you can get me through the night. Holla, yeah, all men follow.
You know what a loser is? A real loser is somebody that's so afraid of not winning, they don't even try.
You know you make me wanna keep my heels up and down. Come on now, don't forget to say you will. Don't forget to say
The way I see it, if something makes you sad when it ends, it must have been pretty wonderful when it was happening.
Heading out to San Francisco for the Labor Day weekend show. And honey, I didn't know that I'd be missing you so. Come Monday, it'll be alright. Come Monday, I'll be holding you tight. I spent 4 lonely days around LA.
I want to say it has been a pleasure to have worked alongside all of you. These have been the best years of my career.
Yes, he was some guy. Never forgets a martini.
I'll be seeing in all the old familiar places that this heart of mine embraces all day through.
I just hope people think I did the best I could. That I was there, I worked hard, and I did the best I could.
I'll be looking at the moon, but I'll be seeing you.
All of those luminaries forever missed. Thank you so much for joining us these last 3 hours, everyone. I'm going to see you back here tomorrow at noon Eastern. Stephen Romo picks up our coverage right after the break.
Man, a lot of lives. And that's just basically touching off on America standards.
How January 6th broke the justice system. So Ryan, walk us through what happened in Maine. Unlike Colorado, its state Supreme Court ruled this decision unilaterally was made by the state's Secretary of State Bellows. What do we know about her reasoning behind her decision?
That's right, Stephen, and that's why it sort of puts us in a little bit of a different category where you have this one official who's sort of unilaterally making this decision as opposed to, a board of justices and reviewing the evidence through a court process. But that's the way things are set up in Maine. And essentially what Bellows said is that she felt duty bound by the evidence presented to have to make this decision. Take a listen.
The weight of the evidence, all of the evidence, made clear that Mr. Trump was aware of the tinder laid by a multi-month effort to delegitimize a Democratic election, the election of 2020, and then chose to light a match on January 6th.
So what we have here is...
Now, once more, certain people look at this in that perspective, which you can't deny. But let's look at it from the other perspective. How come and what would motivate the people in America of ever even contemplating a insurrection? It's because of the players before them that has made a mess out of our system, out of our judicial system, out of our political system, out of our everything system. That's why. We must not just look at one fact. We have to look at all the facts, not just part of them. And yes, it did happen.
Is one individual who can sort of be the focus of a lot of the ire that we've seen inevitably come from a lot of Trump supporters in the aftermath of these legal setbacks. We saw threats against the Colorado justices, for example. So that's obviously something that I think she had to keenly be aware of in the lead up to this decision. And we can probably likely expect a lot of threats going forward because that's just a situation we've seen in time and time again after Donald Trump has faced legal setbacks.
An unfortunate reality. Ryan Riley, thanks so much for that reporting. And joining us now is criminal defense attorney and MSNBC legal analyst Danny Ceballos for more on this. Danny, if you would first break down the difference.
Let's go on. Let's move on. You got one group of people that's defending their perspective and another group of people that's defending their perspective. And what you basically got is the ones in the middle that are collateral damage. And the ones in the middle are the ones that's usually already dealing with unfortunate circumstances to begin with.
Middle East, a stunning surprise attack by Palestinian militants. It started on October 7th, the day many now call Israel's 9/11. In a surprise attack, Hamas militants stormed into Israeli towns and military bases.
They were just all around me, and they were going tree by tree and shooting.
Israel's foreign ministry says about 1,200 people were killed, more than 200 taken hostage, including young children.
It's something that no parent can ever imagine, to see a child in the hands of terrorists.
Israel's response was swift and relentless, but with thousands of Palestinians killed and a humanitarian crisis growing, Israel faced mounting criticism. Those tensions seen on American streets and college campuses, with reports of both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia spiking across the country. As the Middle East war raged on, the one between Ukraine and Russia trudged on. Ukraine's long-awaited counteroffensive stalling and American support waning. Just one of many issues highlighting America's stark divisions. In January, it took 15 ballots.
A speaker has not been elected. Has not been elected. Has not been elected.
To elect Kevin McCarthy as Speaker, a position he held just 9 months before he was ousted.
I fought for what I believe in, and I believe in this country of America.
Like a reality TV show, new contenders came and went.
We're a ship that doesn't have a rudder right now.
Before Louisiana's Mike Johnson got the gavel.
The House will be in order.
An election followed by an expulsion. Scandal-plagued Representative George Santos became only the third congressman since the Civil War to be ejected from the chamber. But no controversy, it seemed, could shake the GOP support for former President Donald Trump, who in April made history too.
It was a legal spectacle never seen before in America, the former president being fingerprinted and being charged with 34 felonies.
Mr. Trump's appearance in a New York courtroom created a media circus that was repeated with indictments in Florida, then Washington, then Georgia, where he mugged for this shot.
We did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong.
He has pleaded not guilty to all charges while preserving a vast lead for his party's presidential nomination, skipping debates.
Donald Trump's a lot different guy than he was in 2016. He owes it to you to be on this stage,
leaving the rest of the field to squabble for seconds.
Do you want a leader from a different generation who's going to put this country first? Or do you want Dick Cheney in 3-inch heels?
They're 5-inch heels, and I don't wear them unless you can run in them.
On the Democratic side, President Joe Biden announced his re-election bid in April.
Are you saying that you would be taking part in our...
It's turned into a stagnation of bad deals.
First, that were far less desirable in 2023. The United Nations declared in late November this was virtually certain to be the planet's warmest year on record. A year with the most billion-dollar disasters in U.S. history, including Hurricane Idalia.
There's some wind gusts that are starting to pound us. We actually just lost power here right now.
And a firestorm that ravaged the island of Maui.
Local people have lost everything. They've lost their house, they've lost their animals, and it's devastating.
They didn't lose everything if they're still living. They didn't lose their lives. But in some cases, going through the aftermath, death would actually have been better for them people than to actually be a victim of the circumstances that happened to them, because now they got to go through this slow, endless agony of trying to regain their lives back. And I know that sounds cruel in somebody like me that's a spiritual person to say that, but in reality, a lot of the people that go through harsh situations, their life becomes that much more miserable after the harsh situation had occurred than it was even before.
Deadliest U.S. wildfire in more than a century, with more than 100 people killed. Gun violence plagued the country again, with cities like Lewiston, Maine joining the long list of communities linked to mass shootings.
Why would he do this? And why in Lewiston, Maine?
18 people were killed there. 6 were gunned down at a private elementary school in Nashville, 3 of them children.
How are our children still dying, and why are we failing them?
Tragedy also reached the depths of the ocean.
Let's get right to the story the whole world is watching, the urgent search for a missing submersible.
In June, OceanGate's Titan submersible vanished while on a sightseeing tour of the Titanic's wreckage. A desperate search offered hope the 5 people on board could be rescued, but crews eventually determined a catastrophic implosion killed everyone on the ill-fated voyage. In the sky, the U.S. military shot down a Chinese spy balloon flying over American airspace, heightening tensions between the two countries. The crisis at the border widened in 2023, with places like New York and Chicago running out of room to house migrants who were bused to their cities.
Indict! Convict! Send those killer cops to jail!
In January, protesters took to the streets following the death of Tyree Nichols.
I'm just trying to go home!
The 29-year-old black man was kicked and punched during a traffic stop in Memphis, dying 3 days later. 5 police officers were fired and charged with state and federal crimes. 1 has since pleaded guilty, the others not guilty. In the courts, the Supreme Court handed down a historic decision in June, gutting affirmative action, effectively ending race-conscious college admissions.
This is a really disappointing decision.
Perhaps no court case generated more attention in 2023 than the trial of Alec Murdaugh. The disgraced attorney from South Carolina, accused of killing his wife and son, took the stand in his own defense.
Did you take this gun or any gun like it and blow your son's brains out?
No, I did not.
The jury deliberated only 3 hours before finding Murdaugh guilty. King Charles III was officially coronated in May. Prince Harry was there for the event. His wife Meghan Markle was notably not, in a year when the royal rift between the couple and palace spared no one. Harry's memoir,
We want privacy! We want privacy!
All right, let's go on. It's been a busy year. Let's back up. Right there.
In there. So, it just sort of speaks to going into 2024, how many challenges Donald Trump is facing here, right? 91 criminal charges. Right now, there's still a trial on the books for March, and trials scheduled down the road after that, 4 separate criminal trials altogether. So just a really tight legal calendar, I think, for Donald Trump going into the new year, and expect to see these developments continue to cascade down as this week roll closer to Super Tuesday here.
Seems so difficult to juggle all that. All right, Ryan Riley, thank you. And joining us now is one of those challengers who filed to disqualify Donald Trump from the Maine Republican ballot, Ethan Strimling. Ethan is also the former mayor of Portland, Maine. Ethan, thank you for joining us. So, as we mentioned, you're one of the 3 former Maine lawmakers who brought this up, saying Donald Trump should be disqualified from the state's ballot. You're actually the only Democrat, the other 2 former Republican state senators. So walk us through, why did you feel the need to challenge Trump's eligibility?
Well, let me just start by saying yesterday was a really good day for democracy and for upholding our Constitution, and I think that was the impetus. I've been writing a little bit about this, and, honestly, who knew anything about the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution before Donald Trump tried to commit an insurrection, tried to block the peaceful transfer of power in order to keep himself in power. But once that occurred, I think there's a lot of us in the country who felt like no man who tries to commit insurrection against our country should be allowed to run again or hold office, certainly should not be allowed to hold the White House. And from there, I spoke to a couple attorneys, and once Colorado ruled the way it did, the first judge who ruled clearly that Donald Trump was an insurrectionist, I think that said to all of us, okay, we now have a third party who the evidence, listened to both sides. Donald Trump had his day in court. Those who disagreed had their day in court, and the judge made a finding of fact that he was indeed an insurrectionist. And from there, the Colorado Supreme Court, of course, affirmed that finding of fact and extended it to say that our 14th Amendment does indeed apply to him. So once that ruling came into effect, it, I think, gave all of us an opportunity to say, we need to have this question asked, and Maine was right for that question, and very pleased with how the ruling came down.
Yeah, it's not worked out for other states, but I'm curious, but what was your reaction when you heard Secretary of State Bellows' decision last night? Were you surprised? Did you expect this?
Well, I think that, when we went into this hearing, it was an open question, and before she ruled, it was still an open question. I felt optimistic because, look, to all who are at all neutral in this, observing from the outside, clearly Donald Trump is an insurrectionist. Clearly, the Constitution bans you from running for office, holding office, if you are an insurrectionist. So on those sort of fundamental, easiest points, it seems like a slam dunk. But when you get into these processes, look, Secretary Bellows did a very good job in the hearing. She asked both sides very tough questions. She clearly understood the law. She had researched them very carefully before she even came into that hearing. And so I think from there, we were all saying, okay, how is she going to rule in this? She clearly has the jurisdiction to rule. Maine law awards that to our Secretary of State. So I was optimistic, but in all those times I've been optimistic before, sometimes it doesn't quite work out. So again, it was a good day for democracy. That's mostly what I felt.
Trump's team calling this atrocious. They called it an atrocious decision and said an objection will be filed quickly. So how do you expect this to act?
It's a good day looking at it from that perspective of what he's talking about. But it is not a good day in regards towards the solution to the American problems. Because if anything, we are continually digging our hole deeper and going further down the cliff than we are going up. A lot of people don't focus on what happened a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. They only want to focus upon the things that's right now. And that's one of the things that has gotten us in trouble, is that so many people had faith in the system in thinking that as long as we got the right officials in power, we're paying them the money to do what needs to be done, let them do it. Well, that's fine and dandy if they're doing it. But obviously somebody has not been doing their jobs whenever you wind up with a nation, as of today, right now, over $34 trillion in debt. Something has occurred, and it did not take 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years. It took a span of several years to put us where we are today. So the American people are still in the middle, caught in the middle between a hard place and a rock, and basically the American people are the ones that's going to be shortchanged, while the politicians have still got fat bank accounts and still driving nice cars and living in nice homes. Now, if that's not a conflict of interest, I'll kiss your tail and give you 30 minutes to draw up a crowd. The American people have been bamboozled. And now the American people are starting to realize that, and they all come out into the playing field at one time that created what they created January the 6th. Now, are we going to look at this in the proper angle towards saying, okay, we've already got ourselves in this fix. Now, how are we going to get ourselves out of this fix? Or are we going to continue to keep badgering and blaming one another for the problems that, as far as I'm concerned, began in the late 80s pertaining to the Reagans and Mr. Daddy Senior Bush, that has led us down this endless road by putting all the dots together and not just a few of them.
Actually play out when the Supreme Court weighs in, if it in fact does, which many people are expecting it to.
Yeah, and I hope it does. I think we need the Supreme Court to step in and give us some clarity around for the entire country.
It's the Supreme Court that started us in the wrong direction during not only the fact of what went on in the Reagan era that the church world didn't want to pick up on, but during the year 2000, whenever they basically made a decision for we the people in putting young Bush in the same saddle. And that, I believe, was a reflection upon what happened to his daddy, and that was a reflection towards who masterminded and plotted and actually pulled it off pertaining to 9/11. But yet and all, these people still got fat bank accounts. They're still living in their nice homes. They're still driving their nice automobiles. There has still not been true accountability. And as far as I'm concerned, we're still kicking the can down the road because I haven't heard nobody truly have a solution to the problems that obviously have been shoved down our throats that now we the people are suffering on account of.
The entire country, and I hope that they're able to put their own partisanship aside. I certainly hope that Justice Clarence Thomas recuses himself. Obviously, he has some very serious conflicts with his family and his wife's involvement in on January 6th. But I hope that they can put aside their partisanship. The fact that 3 of them were appointed by Trump, it's clear, I think, to anybody that if you look at the Constitution, somebody who was president of the United States who tries to block the peaceful transfer of power through a violent insurrection should not be allowed to hold that office again. And not only should they not be allowed to, but the Constitution requires that they are not allowed to. It is a flat-out disqualification. So I certainly can't predict the Supreme Court. I think it'll be an uphill battle. But I think that if they look at our Constitution, they'll understand there really is only one way to go, and hopefully they'll do the right thing.
Well, time is certainly ticking down. Super Tuesday just around the corner, coming up in March. Do you have any concern that this could fuel just more uncertainty and an already fraught
Sure it will. Create more confusion, more anxiety, more drama.
Political process?
No, not more uncertainty. I think, both Colorado and in Maine, they have stayed their decisions while while courts are wrestling with this. I think if courts take too much time, that's a problem. And really, because it'll be a problem for Republican voters. It won't be fair to Republican voters to, keep Trump on the ballot and let them vote for him and then disqualify him after that.
If Donald J. Trump would have done what he done after America was no longer providing services for its people pertaining to retirement, retirees, and being humanitarian towards doing the proper and right thing to its citizens. If Donald Trump would have come in on a latter part of severity of this great nation, instead of him being looked at towards being a zero, he would have been looked at towards being a hero. He got the cart in front of the horse whenever it come to using the Insurrection Act to do what he was doing. Because they was still providing checks, they was still taking care of their citizens. Now, eventually, the path that we're on, eventually the inevitable is going to happen. It's going to happen unless we all pull together and decide, you know what, rather than allow for that to happen, why don't we just do this, and this, and put all this other stuff, just basically dump it, and let's start all over again. And I've used that analogy again and again and again, just like the little farmer that planted a crop. He's got 1 or 2 choices after it comes up, and he realizes that didn't about half of it come up. He can either live with what he's got, or break it all back under and redo it again. That's where we're at as a nation. That's basically where we're at as a whole pertaining to the global society. But we're finger pointing right now. Oh, it's your fault. Oh, it's your fault. Oh, it's this party's fault. It's that party's fault. It's all of our faults. It's all of our faults.
They've all wasted their votes. So, behalf of Republican voters, which is why, two colleagues who joined me, I think, came into this. They don't believe that Donald Trump should be on the ballot, but they also want to make sure that Republican voters aren't wasting their vote. So let's get this decision decided. There are other candidates in Maine who are on the Republican ballot that Republicans will have an opportunity to vote for. And if Trump is not there because of this disqualification, then people will have a chance to decide between those who are remaining that actually have a chance to serve in this office.
So much yet to be seen. Ethan Stribling, thanks so much for your time today.
But the office that you're talking about is crumbling. The office that you're talking about is $34 trillion in debt. The office that you're talking about has failed to protect its citizens. Ain't much of an office if you're already trillions of dollars in debt.
Thanks, buddy. Of course. And joining us now, Anthony Coley, former DOJ Director of Public Affairs and Senior Advisor to Attorney General Merrick Garland.
Let's go forward.
It'd be like other diets that were bland and
can't go no further forward. Caught up with itself.
And that she had no choice but to disqualify him. Listen.
Maine law specifically
We just got through hearing that a while ago.
Business that they're seeing those vacancies. It looks like you are looking to fill that.
We are a nation of laws. Therefore, until he is actually found guilty of the crime of insurrection, he should be allowed on the ballot. Doesn't this open up a case where it's just going to spiral with both sides playing this game over and over and over again, and you're now going to have...
And the people that's going to get hurt are the people, we the people, in the middle of all this. It is so ridiculously, horrifyingly sad.
Again, and you're now going to have people stripped of being on the ballot before voters can even weigh in.
Well, that's the fear. There are really two issues here. Is the decision by the Maine Secretary of State legally correct, but also what's the effect going to be? Do the liberals in Congress really want a pro-Trump state official in Alabama or Mississippi determining whether or not Joe Biden is going to be on the ballot? So that's part of it. But also, it's just a very presumptuous and weak opinion on constitutional law and on constitutional history, and just the presumptuousness of it. As Brett was saying, her role is to determine whether or not you're 35, you've been here 14 years as a citizen, and issues like that, not to weigh into an incredibly complex issue like that. And you're right, Congress has passed a law, a criminal statute, enforcing this section of the 14th Amendment. So there's no due process here either.
Saul Weiserberg, Brett Tolman, thanks so much for joining us today. Much appreciated. Well, we have a legal showdown now shaping up in Colorado as the Republican Party there pushes to keep former President Trump on the ballot. We'll talk to Colorado GOP Chair Dave Williams. He's leading the charge. That's coming up next.
Is back. The coupon is in the commercial.
We're going to end it. We're going to end it right there pertaining to all this incredible situation that's been forced upon to us. And
we are a nation of...
I want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your patience. Good luck to all of us as we enter into another chapter of our domain, and heaven help us all. I want to pray for the needy, the lonely, the sick, the abused, the used, the elderly, those that can't defend for themselves. Pray for those that are in the middle of conflict right now, regardless whether it's on a personal scale or a major scale or a national, international scale. We want to pray for all of those, that God have mercy on us all. Thank you and shalom. Boy, oh boy. We're going to need it.